I am trained in the nervous system. I am trained in a lot of this stuff. And sometimes I get online or like open podcasts and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. And so, what does that mean for our youth athletes?
The nervous system truly needs simple and gentle to actually
Yeah.
recover and prepare for an intense training or a competition the next day. The first thing we went back and forth about was cold plunges. I've been
Yeah.
questioning them for a while. They became they became all the hype just a few years ago, and a lot of gyms in Tampa are just like using them as their competitive edge to sell and get members, and you see all their members doing the cold plunge after the workout. And I
Mhm.
couldn't help but ask, is this stressing out the nervous system more?
I actually witnessed an athlete go into shock after going into a cold plunge.
Emily, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. I feel like I've been a frequent flyer lately. So many things to talk about.
Yeah, a lot to talk about today. We really need you with this discussion because we're going to talk a lot about recovery, overcomplicating recovery, all the recovery tracking apps and biohacks and methods. And I
Mhm.
don't know about you, but I've had to stop listening to a lot of these health and biohack podcasts. You know what I'm talking about? Like Andrew Huberman, the Jay Shetty's of the world, Diary of a CEO, where they bring on all
Yeah.
these experts and they're talking about red light therapy and cold plunges and HRV apps and it's just so much noise. I think we need to have this discussion that a lot of this can cause more harm than good, especially for our younger athletes. So have you
Mhm.
stopped consuming some of these people? Because I can't do it anymore.
I definitely have. I have 1000% limited my consumption. And I think a part of that is we're just living in kind of information overload, to be honest. And I think not only that, but we're kind of moving in a time where um, it's not just, and this is not to say that people can't have an opinion, but I think there's huge differences between having opinions and talking about your own personal experience. And then also like, what is the research saying? What have we studied? Right? What have we, and I think there's a balance, but I'm personally finding like my own system just being really tapped out by all the information. And like, I am trained in the nervous system. I am trained in a lot of this stuff. And sometimes I get online or like open podcasts and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. And so, what does that mean for our youth athletes, as you said, right? And also parents trying to decipher it for their athletes as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about these things today and just different wacky recovery methods that a lot of people are pushing. But you said it perfectly when we were exchanging messages on this. The nervous system truly needs simple and gentle to actually
Yeah.
recover and prepare for an intense training or a competition the next day. And
Hmm.
the first thing we went back and forth about was cold plunges. And I've been
Yeah.
questioning them for a while. They became they became all the hype just a few years ago, and a lot of gyms in Tampa are just like using them as their competitive edge to sell and get members, and you see all their members doing the cold plunge after the workout. And I
Hmm.
couldn't help but ask, is this stressing out the nervous system more? Because a lot of these people are claiming that the cold plunge and all this cold therapy is a recovery method, but I know you've looked at the research and you're well studied on this, but it actually raises the stress response in the body
Hmm.
and doesn't truly recover you.
Yeah. So I have looked into it a lot because I do a lot of nervous system work. And I actually got really curious because I actually witnessed an athlete go into shock after going into a cold plunge.
Oh my gosh.
And so what I really got curious about is, I think the point, right, of a cold plunge is to help the nervous system kind of like complete the stress response, right, and shift into that parasympathetic um, rest and digest state, right? Okay, fine. And I think what people don't understand is that stress on the body, on the mind, on the nervous system is stress. And so getting into a cold plunge is stress on your system. And what I am finding is that the majority of our athletes today are living with chronic nervous system dysregulation, which means that they are spending ample time, prolonged time in their stress response, in their sympathetic nervous system. And so when you then go get into a cold plunge, that does have the potential to actually further heighten the stress response and actually tip you over the edge into what we might call shock, right? And so, as I've kind of looked into the research on this, essentially what is kind of happening is, and one research study calls it kind of like an autonomic conflict with cold water immersion. And basically, what's happening is when we get into the cold water, there is this huge sympathetic response, right? But there's also a huge parasympathetic response, what's called the diving reflex, which is kind of this like when mammals kind of get into cold water, it's kind of this like response, right? So it's actually kind of like a breath holding pattern, if that makes sense. And so again, what can happen is if you're already spending prolonged time in that sympathetic activation response, right, and then you get into the cold plunge, what can happen is for some people, I'm not saying that this is like every single person, but it can actually push your heart into arrhythmia, right, and a potential shock response. And so my whole thing has been like, I'm certainly not going to sit here and like, hate or bash on cold plunges if they work for people. I think at the end of the day, you have to find what works for you. And I think we need to bring a little bit more awareness around this for athletes, give them more information about what's actually happening in the system. And my take has always been less is better. Gentle and simple is really kind of what the nervous system needs more often than not. And I'm just not sure that adding more stress to the system in this situation is going to be the most effective thing for most people. That's just my take.
I totally agree with that. And that's such a good point that a lot of our young athletes, our college and our pro athletes, are in that chronic state of stress and overstimulation from the phone and the apps and academics, games, practices, training. So the
Yeah.
question is, when are they truly resting? When are they truly getting that nervous system to come all the way down? And I get asked a lot about cold plunges and cryotherapy from sports parents. Oh, should my girl be getting in a cryo chamber for recovery? And I'm like, no, she just needs to sit and stare at a wall.
Well, isn't there, I think there's more research around how actually cold right after you lift is not effective
Right.
for building strength, right?
Yep. And it constricts the blood flow to the
Right.
muscles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't
So
know.
it's,
I think again, I think simple and gentle is best. And I would say, why that is not appealing or quote unquote sexy for a lot of people is because it's not always comfortable for people, right? Like the slowing down, the pausing, the doing the kind of again the less sexy kind of recovery things of like just putting your legs up the wall, right? And kind of allowing yourself to be still in silence for about 8 to 10 minutes. Like I find that that's not like people kind of look at that and they're like, well, that doesn't feel fun for me. And I'm like, well, regulating your nervous system and recovery is not always quote unquote fun or sexy, right? But I do really think that less is more. And I'm a huge advocate of how do we help kids find accessible ways, right, to down regulate the system.
you're right. It is really hard to just sit with yourself and be bored, but it pays dividends in the end because then you come back, you're truly recovered, your brain is really sharp, your nervous system is ready to go. And I
Mm-hmm.
highly recommend it. And you mentioned 8 to 10 minutes. That's hard to do to sit by yourself, but I try to do it for at least an hour a day where I'll just sit on my porch during my lunch break and stare at my backyard. My
Mm-hmm.
phone's somewhere in my bedroom in the house, my computer's somewhere else, but it's so refreshing, even though it's like really uncomfortable with your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I can really calm all the way down and then go back to what I'm doing with even more focus and energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that I like to kind of do with my clients, my athletes, is what I call microdose the system with down regulation. So, and actually, we know that smaller, more repetitive down regulation is more effective. And I'm not saying that I don't love the hour piece of kind of sitting and allowing yourself to be outside in nature. I think that's great, and 3 minutes here, 5 minutes here, simply pushing back from your computer and taking, three intentional kind of expansive diaphragmatic breaths, right? Stuff like that, I think can be really huge. It doesn't always have to be this super elaborate, drawn out, practice. I think actually most of our athletes today would benefit from smaller kind of chunks of down regulation throughout their day and throughout their week rather than like, oh, let's just take a full day and rot on the couch. Because more often than not, they're not resting, right? They're binging on Netflix or we're on our phone. Which I'm guilty of that too, right? But we do have to kind of add in those pockets, those moments of down regulation for sure.
Now, I want to talk about just different tracking apps and like HRV sleep apps, like constantly pursuing this optimal living and just checking your sleep at the moment you wake up, or is my HRV in a good position so I can train? How can having more of these apps be detrimental to true recovery and the nervous system?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple main things that come to mind for me. I think for sure you alluded to it, right? It's very much this kind of like obsessive compulsive checking, looking at the watch, looking at, the app on your phone, which I don't think is supportive for the nervous system. I think it ends up enhancing stress and anxiety, keeping you in potential rumination longer. I think not only that, also, I actually think long term it keeps you disconnected from your body. So, what I find is that more often than not, what starts to happen is people don't actually build a connection with what we call interoception, the ability to really sense in and feel their body and what's happening inside of their body, right? Which is not ideal either. Because they're constantly going off what the number says or what the data says, right? Rather than being able to just sense in self, right? Like, like how do I feel? Or, how did that workout feel, right? How was moving my body? How did my body move throughout that workout? Stuff like that. I think the other piece for me is it ends up more often than not, I think, adding or increasing shame and guilt. For example, you get to the end of the day, right, and you didn't hit your step count or something, right? And more often than not, we see people punishing. And then there's also a lot of literature, a lot of research that links, more kind of compulsive, obsessive tracking with disordered eating and eating disorders and restriction. I think the last thing I'll say is, and we can get into the sleep bit as well, but I think overall there is a decrease in enjoyment in life, to be honest with you, and the ability to just like be present in your experience because you're worried about tracking steps or whatever, right, the entire time. So I don't know if you have any added pieces to that.
Yeah, I think it tends to overcomplicate things. And if you're constantly worried about, well, what's my sleep score? Or did I get enough REM sleep or deep sleep? Or did I get my steps? It's like, are you freaking out so much that you're actually not truly
Yeah,
optimizing?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
I mean, it's a good question to ask because I think a lot of people get caught up in these tracking and recovery apps because they want to quote unquote optimize, but are they like panicking so much to get the perfect score that they're constantly in that stressed out state? And it's like, are
hmm,
you truly living optimally and recovering optimally? And what are your
yeah.
thoughts on the Aura Ring and all the sleep apps?
I will say this: I don't wear anything. I don't
Me
even wear a
either.
watch on my hand
Nope.
or on my wrist. Like I don't. I don't find that, and I am someone who has pretty much struggled with sleep for my entire life, and like struggled with insomnia for a lot of my life. And I just don't think for me, they're not helpful. I also, in the research and the literature, came across a new word that I didn't know existed, but it's called orthosomnia, which is this like intense preoccupation with getting the most optimal sleep, right? And I do find I actually just, posted a story on this 2 days ago because my sleep over the last couple of days has not been great. And I think this kind of then tendency to like, oh my God, why isn't my sleep great? What's happening? And to kind of overthink and go through everything that might be the reason why, I think is counterintuitive and it often exacerbates. And for me, a lot of my life, it's actually led to a lot more sleep anxiety, which means closer and closer to bed, I start having way more anxiety around, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to fall asleep? Is this going to be another night? And so I'm a huge fan of just like, we gotta minimize that. I think it also really like you have to remember that tracking devices, whether it's an Aura Ring, whether it is your Apple Watch, it doesn't give context. It misses context. So I'm going to give you an example of like a youth athlete where this could really, really backfire. And I'm sure you see it backfire, right? Let's say that this youth athlete is actually like his parents are getting a divorce. And he's shuffling back and forth between houses. He's trying to go to training and practice in school, right? And, he's potentially checking in with like a Whoop score or something, right? And chronically, right, for like over a week now, right, that Whoop score. And I have to be honest with you, like I've never owned a Whoop. So, and I've
Me
worked with
either.
a lot of athletes that have had them, but I don't know the nuances of the inside of the app, right? But he's checking scores, right? And he's looking and, things are coming back in like, what we might consider to be like the red zone or like the danger zone, right? What I see happen more often than not is that athlete then starts to like really internalize that and there's shame that evolves and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough. Why is my sleep not good? Why is my HRV so low? Right. And you're like, um, dude, you're going through a major life transition here, right? Like your parents are split, you're shuffling between houses. Like, of course, you might not be doing right well, or functioning in your most optimal state. Like that makes so much sense to me, right? And we need to normalize that. And I think again, that shame and kind of the missing of the context is it's really really important, because it helps it normalize whatever an athlete might be going through, remove that shame, and then also they can just simply show up to their experience and kind of address what they can when they can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Oh man, there's a lot to go over there. So I do want to touch on the sleep part first. So you talked about how a lot of this can cause more sleep anxiety if
Hmm.
you're not getting a good sleep score, and then every time you go to bed you're like, how do I sleep better? And then you get up all up in your head and then you can't fall asleep or stay asleep. And I've seen that with a lot of my college athletes. I had a cross country runner at University of Maryland who had insomnia for a couple months in a row because she was so worked up that she wasn't sleeping. She's like, what can I do? What supplements can I take? What routine can I do before bed? And I just told her, don't overthink it. Just go about your day, play your sports, train, just continue to do the basics. And then eventually she started to sleep better the less she thought about it, which was really interesting. But it kind
Yeah.
of comes back to your point that the nervous system needs to have gentle. And I think she just wasn't gentle with it because she kept second guessing herself and getting so worked up over her sleep that it was making her sleep worse.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that gets back into this like when we think about, or especially for athletes, right? When we think about optimization, I think the train of thought is like, okay, great. Like, how much can I be doing here? I have to maximize every aspect of my life, my time, my routine, all of the above, right? Which often trends towards actually adding more to their schedule, to their plate, to their routines, to their habits, right? When in reality, as you're saying, sometimes that just like really backfires, right? And sometimes you actually need to be doing less. And I would say more often than not, I find the same. When you do less, when you stick to the basics and simple, and like another added piece for her could be adding non-sleep rest throughout the day, right? Stuff like that, I think is just a way better approach than kind of overcomplicating, over analyzing, and kind of spending pretty much every second of the day thinking about it.
Yeah. I want to come back to your example with an athlete's parents going through a divorce and then getting worked up about their Whoop score or their HRV. And my question always is like, well, if your scores are bad, then what's the practical application? Are you going to not show up and train? Are you not going to do a strength training session because you got a bad sleep score? And I personally used to do that. When I had a bad sleep score, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't do my hard strength training workout today. And
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of ruin my progress in my program. So I think sometimes it makes people second guess what they've been doing consistently, and it makes them less consistent with things. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure. Yeah, totally. I think it does make sense. And, to be fair, I think I've even experienced that in my life, even though I don't track anything, right? I think it's a very human tendency to kind of like wake up and be like, oh my God, I slept so terrible, right? That means this day is going to drag on. I'm not going to be as energetic, right? And I think that is, that's a piece of what we're talking about as well, right? Which is like, okay, so, this is where I really like things like mindfulness and kind of like neutral thinking, and really just kind of like, okay, more so like, let's see if we can kind of reframe this and say like, okay, yeah, right. Here's the reality. I did not get my 8 to 8.5 hours of sleep last night, right? Okay, great. What are the things that I actually have to do that will help me, right? Continue to move through the day like I normally would. And I think sometimes having, at least in what I'm seeing and kind of the athletes that I work with, what I'm seeing is sometimes the data, the reinforcement through data or seeing things on a Whoop or technology or whatever can overcomplicate that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I don't know if you're seeing this issue too, but sports parents are getting sucked into all these tools and biohacks and tracking apps, and
Mm-hmm.
like dad's trying to optimize everything of his life. So my 13-year-old daughter must do the same. And I'm just like, no, 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 no. Your 13-year-old daughter just needs to eat enough, fuel for performance, not train and be on her grind 7 days a week. Let's get that first before we try to add in like HRV apps like dad is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I definitely see that. And I think we've talked about this before, right? Of just kind of like always remembering that, kids, I think sometimes, and I am not a parent, so I really want to preface this. And it could be a totally different ballgame when I become a parent, but like, I think a really big key for parents is to remember that kids are not adults, um, in any way, shape, or form, right? And so I think it's kind of one of those where, all right, as an adult, if that is what feels best and most supportive for you in terms of tracking and optimizing and doing all the things, great, right? But your kid is in a totally different playing field. And again, I am always going to advocate for less is better, um, gentle is better, simple is better.
Yeah. Yeah, parents do whatever you want to do. If it works for you, great. But I just see them getting sucked into the noise of all these trends and the health podcasts, and they're spending way too much time on YouTube following very contradictory advice from all these influencers. And this is like the most interesting thing I've observed with this whole recovery biohack optimization movement. A lot of these influencers aren't actually optimal. A lot of them post about how they're always sick, how they have chronic illness, and how they like got hurt by trying a biohacking method. I don't know if you've heard of Brian Johnson, but he does some
Mm-mm.
crazy stuff. He's like this guy who's trying to live to like 100 or something, and he takes like 300 supplements a day. This guy is supposedly the face of optimization, but he like injured himself doing one of these methods. And I'm just like,
Mm.
guys, the proof is in the pudding. Look at these people. Are they
Mm-hmm.
truly healthy? And I would argue them chasing that optimal is actually not healthy
Mm-hmm.
because they're shocking their system. They're always stressed, that they're not fully recovered. They're just trying methods that aren't even well researched for a long enough period of time, which can also be dangerous. So that's
Mm-hmm.
my issue with it is these people, you observe their accounts and I'm like, these people aren't healthy.
Yeah, I think I definitely see patterns of that. And I think, one of the hardest things, and we've talked at length about social media, I think social media is just, eh, it's such a catch 22, right? It can be great in terms of, connecting people and community. I mean, to be fair, that's how we met, right? And, gaining information and resources that might not have been accessible before. And it's incredibly dangerous at times. We know that. And we're only seeing 1% of the story, to be honest with you, right? And I just think that what we don't do enough, particularly for our kids, right, is build the skill of kind of critical thinking and the ability to kind of like look at the misinformation or the disinformation, or just even to kind of what you're saying, like have more critical thinking around what is healthy. And healthy is, I think a combination of objective and subjective, right? And, I think part of the problem with social media is you're constantly seeing contradictory messages around quote unquote healthy. And I think it's, I mean, sheesh, like I get confused half the time. Like sometimes I get on and I'm like, wait, what? Like, what is happening? Right. And then I have to like literally sign off and like check myself and be like, wait, Emily, no, like you do know, right? Like the answer there, right? But I think more so than anything, I think what I really like to kind of like bring to the equation for a lot of my athletes and like even psychoeducation with parents is that like we're not meant to be optimal and regulated all the time.
Right.
That's not what it means to be a human being. And to be fair, I don't think that's what it means to be healthy. Like you're supposed to go through stressful things. You're supposed to have bad days. You're supposed to have a night where you don't sleep very well, right? For whatever factors. Like I just think that we have to also do a better job normalizing that like you are not meant to be regulated all the time. And when you're not regulated, it certainly is not helpful to freak out about that. And I have to really catch myself with that as well, right? I would say like right now in this phase of life, like I'm not spending a lot of time regulated. Like I'm very dysregulated. I have a lot of stress. I have a lot of moving pieces in my life. And sometimes I kind of, as a nervous system, coach, right? I kind of sometimes find myself getting in this headspace of like, oh gosh, like, okay, like we really got to like regulate here. And sometimes, it really just takes that, pause, breathe. It's okay to not be regulated, right? And sometimes the answer isn't to snap your fingers and regulate. I think that's the other major kind of like thing that we're missing when we talk about kind of like optimizing and regulating in particular. Like I think people have this misconception that like, oh, well, when we're dysregulated or the first sign of stress, right? The answer is snap your fingers, use a tool, jump right on it, re-regulate yourself. And sometimes that's actually counterintuitive. And sometimes what your system needs is to actually just kind of like be in that dysregulation and kind of move through the stress response, because that's what we're supposed to do as human beings. So I don't know if you find that as well.
I agree. I think it ties into this whole like chasing perfectionism, and a lot of our athletes get sucked into that. And like you said, we're not meant to be perfect. We are human, and it's a beautiful thing. I think it's important for parents and young athletes to understand you don't always have to be optimal, you just have to be adaptable. So
Mm,
if you're at a tournament and you're a young soccer player, you might not have your perfect memory foam pillow with your weighted blanket and your magnesium or whatever. It's like you have to learn how to be in that environment and show up
mm-hmm,
and play games. Yes, try and sleep the best you can at the Holiday Inn wherever you are, but it's not going to be your perfect little routine. And if you get stressed out about not having that perfect routine, that's going to be worse for your performance. You kind of have to be more present, more adaptable, and not panic too much when you're not in that optimal perfect routine.
yeah, you are 100% right. And I talk to especially like my pro guys about this because, they travel constantly, right? And so you can't control every factor of your preparation in particular. But, I think one of the things that, especially in like nervous system language and like polyvagal theory, which is developed by Stephen Porges and then like very heavily influenced by Deb Dana, like we talk about resilience and being resilient in nervous system language by way of having a flexible nervous system that can move through states with more ease, right? Not a nervous system that never gets bothered by things, never gets stressed out, never gets thrown off, right? And is constantly in regulation. That's not resilience. Resilience is going through human life and being affected and impacted and stressed out by things and all of the above, right? But having a nervous system that has the capacity and the flexibility to move through all those things and eventually return to regulation.
Now, I want to ask about how this all ties into nutrition because I think there's a lot of messaging online, clean eating, non toxic living. And look, I'm all for nutrient density, I'm all for whole foods. But realistically, again, when athletes are traveling, they're at a tournament or showcase, you're going to be eating the freaking bacon or eggs at the hotel or the muffin. There comes a point where, like you said, you can't control everything and you still can do the best you can, be adaptable in that situation. And I think the panic over the foods being not clean is far worse than the not clean foods themselves. Does that, I think that
Oh yeah, I would
explain
agree
that
with that.
okay.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I follow a nutritionist, or maybe she's a registered dietitian. I think maybe both. But she's always talking about, like, and she'll tee it up in her posts of like, here's all the stuff that I won't eat, or as a registered dietitian, that I would never eat. And you go to the next slide and it's like kiwis because I'm allergic.
Oh, yeah.
Or like milk because I'm lactose intolerant, right? Like all
Right.
these things. And it's like, it has nothing to do with like the, quote unquote, like clean, or like it has this in it or that in it, right? Obviously I'm not a nutritionist or a registered dietitian, but I do think, labels, language that we use around food is really important. I do think, again, this tie back to kind of like the technology piece more often than not. And there was a pretty large meta-analysis that looked at, all of the studies out there around kind of this like compulsive obsessive technology use with regards to food, exercise, um, sleep, tracking, all of those things, right? And over half of the studies um, showed a link between this kind of like compulsive checking, tracking, and eating disorders and disordered eating. So I do think there is something there. I think I'm someone that definitely has struggled with disordered eating, and I don't track anything. And at the same time, I will say there have been times, particularly with my registered dietitian and like functional nutritionist, where I have tracked in order to prove that I'm not eating enough.
Right.
And I think that can be helpful. But I did it for like 2 weeks and then I was done. I think everything is individual, but I would say that, I think, yes, the kind of like obsession of clean eating and optimizing your diet, my registered dietitian and functional nutritionist operates off the like fed is best.
Oh my gosh,
eating
100%.
anything eating anything over nothing is going to be better, right? Always.
100%.
So fed is best, right? I don't know, I think that has been like a life-changing concept for me.
Yeah, I agree. And especially for our young girls too. They're growing, they need the nutrients and the energy availability for that. And then on top of the growth process during adolescence, they need it for their training and all these games that they're playing. And some girls I've seen like run into the issue, like they fall into this trap of clean eating, non toxic living, and they're following all these influencers. And then when they're out on the road, they're too afraid to eat like a breakfast wrap at Starbucks because it's too toxic and it has certain ingredients in it. And I'm like, no, you need to eat something that is better
Hmm.
than nothing, please.
Hmm.
So it's just, yeah, that's one thing I see a lot of. And I get messages from parents on Instagram that their girl is like so freaked out about ingredients that she's not eating enough, and that's where it gets really dangerous, and people need to stop trying to be perfect, stop trying to be 100% clean. It's just, it's
Hmm.
not possible when you're an athlete and you're on the road.
Yeah, and I think, again, that gets back to this piece around like giving more giving athletes more critical thinking skills and the ability to look and decipher information, right? Because like to be fair, like half the time I don't even know what clean eating means. um
I
like
don't know
I'm
either.
always
Is
very
it like
curious, like and
yeah,
who defines that, and what are they basing their definition off of? I don't know. I don't know what clean eating is. Like, to be fair, I think we're moving in an age where like anyone can come online and literally call any food not clean. So I don't know what that means.
Right. It's so true. It's like I like every food, whether it's eggs or meats you get or vegetables, it is processed to some degree. There's going to
Mm,
be some sort of chemical on it if you're going to the
yeah.
local grocery store. So it just is what it is. But it's like, are you not going to eat the vegetables and meat at the grocery store?
Yeah.
So,
Fed is best. Fed is best,
yeah.
people. So
Now, I want to shift gears to mental health because I know you talk a lot about mental health issues in our young athletes. And how does all of this tracking? And I know there's a lot of mental health apps and all the resources popping up. And you
mm.
hear mental health experts saying we need more resources for youth athletes. We need to throw more at them to solve this mental health crisis. What are your thoughts on this? Is this helping? Or is it just making us overcomplicate and talk about it too much?
Hey guys, just want to take a quick moment to shout out our sponsor, Simply Faster, and one of my favorite speed timing systems from them, the Freelap. I use it for my own sprint training as well as for my athletes, and they love it. It's super easy to set up, you can take it to the field on your own, and you can get accurate speed times to track your progress. Check the Freelap link in the caption below to start adding timing into your speed sessions. If you know me, you know I love my Freelap. If you're serious about speed, it's time to start timing.
More technology with regards to mental health, mental and emotional well-being doesn't really seem like the right answer to me, because what I think we really need more than anything is more connection and more of our what we call social engagement system in nervous system language, which is really, really lacking in many of our young people today. I think COVID played a huge role in that. I think simply phones and technology and social media have played a really huge role in that. What a phone or a mental health app cannot ever provide is what we call co-regulation, which is the nervous system to nervous system social connection, right? Well, it's actually a physiological connection, but between two people. We as human beings are wired for co-regulation. We literally come into the world, right, born as infants without the ability to survive. So we have to attach to another human being. And that attachment between infant and primary caregiver starts first and foremost foundationally through the nervous system, because infants can't communicate with language. They don't understand, I love you, I'm going to take care of you, you're my son or my daughter. The infant doesn't understand that. What they understand, right, is being held and touch and facial expression, right? Smile, eyes, tone of voice, right? Those are the things that really lay the foundation for, again, this kind of like co-regulation. And a phone or some mental health app that, you're checking in with and giving a mental well-being score and then getting some type of like quote or like, tip or skill of the day, like cannot provide that. And so much of co-regulation is this ability to what we call attune to one another, right? Like attunement would be me getting on a Zoom with you, Erica, and being able to watch your facial expression and your body posture and the gaze of your eyes and kind of be able to go, what's going on? Like, how are you? Like, how are you doing? And this kind of like, again, this like reciprocal back and forth of human to human, face to face, body to body connection. A phone cannot provide that. I'm going on a rant, but like, this is my whole thing. And so what I get kind of really frustrated around is a lot of organizations, a lot of schools, right, saying, okay, yep, we need to do more about mental health. We need more resources. But the resource is then putting them on their phone or some type of phone app, right? And saying, that's the resource for now mental health. And I think it can be a supplement, but I don't think it's the answer.
And it can really just lead to more of that overstimulation that our kids are already getting from all the other
Agreed.
apps. So
Agreed.
it seems like there's an app for everything.
There is.
It needs to stop. And I get pitched on apps weekly from other people in the industry. Oh, we have an HRV app, we have a sleep app,
Mm-hmm.
we have a speed mechanics app. Do your athletes want to use it? And I'm like, I'm trying to get my athletes off their phones more. Like we
Oh
already
yeah.
use an app to track our strength stuff and write everything down, but I just really don't want to go much further than that because it's too much. My goal of a workout is to have them spend time away from their phones because that's probably the only hour of the day where
Yeah.
they actually are away from their
Mhm.
phones.
Mhm. No, I agree. And there was actually a study that looked at how the link between using an app for like mental health, meaning like kind of like a check-in system, and there's like tips and tools, and like if you kind of like check in and you're indicating that you're sad, right? Then it kind of like matches you with content or stuff like that. That it actually delays getting care, delays getting proper care.
Wow.
So there's that piece as well. I think the other piece that I'm like always gonna, throw in is like I there was a huge, I don't know if you saw this, and I might have to pull up where I saw it, but there was a huge lawsuit around, you know, uh, these apps using data and answers and your information, right? In ways that it's really not supposed to be using them. So, I think there's that too, as well. I don't know. I think certainly, and this is coming from someone like I use an app to help program for my athletes that I work with. But I am also not advocating for that to be the primary source of, what we would consider mental health care or even like mental health or well-being resources. It is meant to supplement, right, the one-on-one stuff that we do, what they're potentially doing with their families, all of that. So
That's a really good point. I didn't even think of it that way, that if a young athlete is using a mental health app as a replacement to getting professional medical attention, that's really scary too. And that could not lead them in the right path. So, yeah, that's something for the parents to keep in mind. You have to work with a professional or get a consultation with someone because an app will only give so much. Like the motivational quotes, I'm like, is this really moving the needle, or the content they're reading on it? I think you nailed it with the connection piece. They need a connection with a professional and someone who's really going to look them in the eye and understand where they're truly coming from.
yeah, I think AI is very, along the lines because we're seeing a lot of people use AI for therapy. And,
Yeah.
to be fair, you can get fine stuff off AI. But again, what you are missing is that connection. You are missing that co-regulation. A computer technology can never, in my opinion, co-regulate with you, or co-regulate with you in a way that another human being can. And that is a critical, I mean, absolutely critical piece to mental health and well-being.
Yeah, the AI relationships are really wild, and I saw a story on the news how there was like a teenage boy who developed some relationship with ChatGPT, and it completely like isolated him and led to even worse mental health issues. So in the
Mm-hmm.
end, it backfired and didn't help at all. And I think what AI does, if kids are using AI as a therapist, is it enables kids to constantly depend on that therapist. Whereas an in person therapist, like a true professional, will give these kids tools to face the world eventually and not depend on therapy and to
Mm-hmm.
become strong. And I think AI just continues to enable you a little bit, especially if you don't know how to talk to it properly. you
It definitely can.
it
It
can
can.
justify bad behaviors, which is
Mm-hmm.
really scary.
Yeah, yeah. And there's been a lot of, I think people are really looking a little bit more into the kind of like crisis care piece as well, with any type of suicidal ideation or self harm. It's really, really scary. And I think the same goes for apps as well. So,
Is there any final piece of advice you would give to the sports parents listening, the athletes on just recovery, all these apps, just anything you want to leave them with?
I think the first thing is this piece around kind of critical thinking and the ability to decipher all of the information. Like, do your homework, seek out experts. I'm always a huge fan, and this is not saying that, a degree or, letters behind a name necessarily mean that you're giving good advice. But I do think there is something to, find a couple experts that you trust, that, their work is backed up. They go off of, to some degree, research. I do think that that is important. This ability to, again, just kind of like decipher the information and ultimately come back to like what is best for our family and what is best for the well-being of my child. I think that's really, really important. And then how do I teach this to my athlete for them to be able to do that as well? And I think so much of this also is like just like social media in general, because like I truly believe, like, I don't think kids should be on social media until they're 18. That's just like my take on it. So I think there's that. And then I think, coupled with that, like, one of the most important things I think in terms of recovery for athletes is this like continued development of a relationship with self. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by spending time with yourself and building the skill of introspection and using things like mindfulness and the concepts of like just simple, gentle practices. I think what I have found that works best with athletes is less is more. You don't need to overhaul the system. It's like, it starts with like one or two things, right? Like one or two things per day, right? Over the next week that I can kind of layer in. And then you see how those go, how those land with your system, how you're sleeping, how you're recovering, how your body feels. And then you kind of build from there so that you're ultimately, again, finding a routine, habits, practices that really work for you. And then I think the last thing is like, I think we really need to kind of like look at the goal around optimization and regulation. Because in my opinion, I think if we're making that the ultimate goal and the end point, I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice, because we're not meant to be regulated all the time. And I think by constantly obsessing and overanalyzing constantly, how can I optimize every aspect of my life, I think it just backfires big time.
Less is more. That's what we always discuss on this podcast. That's the very consistent theme we always use here. And I encourage you guys, please follow Emily's work. She has an amazing message on her social media. I'll link all of her links in the caption below. I'm sure we'll have her on another time because we always have so many topics to talk about. So thank you guys for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.